In one of the streets of a small village, there stood a small house. In the front garden, there stood a mango tree with fine, rich fruits hanging on its branches. The house belonged to three brothers. Their parents died many years ago when they were yet very young. The parents were poor, and the mango tree and a small plot of barren land was the only property they had left behind. The brothers earned their livelihood by selling the mangoes. Now, one day, a very holy and pious saint came to the village. He was very tired, hungry, and thirsty. The eldest of the three brothers was the first to meet him. He offered some of the mangoes from his stock to the saint. The saint, enjoying eating the sweet and juicy mangoes, the saint was very pleased. He asked the eldest brother to ask for a boon. "I wish I had a large herd of cattle," he said. "So be it," said the saint. The next moment, the eldest brother found himself surrounded by many cows and oxen. The saint then met the second brother. He too presented the saint with some fine mangoes. The saint was pleased with him as well. He asked him to ask for a boon. "Make this barren land fertile." The second brother replied. "So be it," said the saint. The next moment, the barren land became fertile. The young man was overjoyed. At last, the saint came to the cottage in which there lived the youngest brother. Here he was received with great warmth. The saint was pleased with hospitality, kindness, and generosity of the youngest brother and asked him to express a wish. "O holy man, all I wish is for a beautiful and virtuous young maiden whom I would marry, so that I can live a happy and contented life." "So be it," said the saint. The next moment, there stood before the young man a young beautiful maiden. The youngest brother just could not believe his eyes. Having given these blessings, the saint continued his journey. Quite some time passed. One day, the saint sat recalling the incidents of his meeting with the three brothers. "Let me revisit them and see for myself what they did with the blessings I gave them," he thought. The saint now disguised himself as a beggar. He reached the village and spent the night in a temple on the outskirts. Next morning, he went to the house of the eldest brother. It was a prosperous place with plenty of milk and honey. The cattle with their horns decked in silver and gold, and little bells chiming round their necks, gave evidence of the prosperity. "I am a hungry beggar. Could you give me a glass of milk?" cried the saint. That very moment, the eldest brother, the master of the house, came out and shouted in a shrill, angry voice, "You beggars! God knows from where you turn up like this to ruin my mornings. Do you know what a glass of milk cost? Get away! Get lost, I say!" The saint now revealed his true identity. "You do not deserve the blessings I gave you. I withdraw the blessing." The saint spoke in a stern voice. The next moment, the eldest brother stood poor and beggarly, with all his prosperity gone from him. The saint then visited the second brother. He too had a large property with his granaries full. "Could you give me a handful of rice or wheat? I am hungry and have been starving for days," cried the saint, disguised as a beggar. "Here comes one more of those beggars." The master of the house came out grumbling. "Have I started an almshouse, you think?" The saint immediately revealed his true identity and said in a stern voice, "I withdrew the blessings I gave you, for I find that you don't deserve it." The next moment, the second brother stood helpless, for all his large granaries and all his prosperity vanished. The saint finally went to the place of the youngest brother. A cold wind was blowing, and it was already evening. "I am a beggar. I am extremely tired. There is a cold breeze outside. Soon it will be night. Could I find shelter under your roof?" The saint cried. The young man, who was the owner of this large and prosperous estate, came out on hearing the voice of the beggar. "Why, sure, you will find shelter for the night. Lucky indeed is the householder who has a guest visiting him, the young man said, at the same time holding the door open for the beggar to enter. The wife of the young man took care of the guest. The young man sat chatting with him till late into the night. The next morning, he was brought a cup of milk and some fresh fruits. He was treated with all the warmth which is usually shown towards a very important guest. The saint was pleased with the young man and his wife. He now revealed his true identity as the holy man, the saint. The man and his wife immediately recognized him and bowed to him. The saint expressed his happiness at finding that riches had not made them proud and heartless. Their virtuous conduct had to be rewarded. The saint now asked them to visit a certain spot to the north of the village where stood a large banyan tree. If the young man and his wife visited the spot the next night when the moon was full, they would find a gift waiting for them. This was the saint's blessing. As instructed by the saint, the young man and his wife went to the spot at midnight. There it was, a large pot full of gold coins. They looked it, receiving it as a part of saint's blessing. The two lived happily ever after, always giving help and shelter to the poor and the needy. The moral of the story is always help the poor and the needy. Never be proud of your wealth and prosperity. You cannot get and retain something that you do not deserve. In one of the streets of a small village, there stood a small house. In the front